Hello, welcome. So glad that you could join us this afternoon. We will wait a few more minutes, see if a few more people join. My name is Will. I am working as the community manager for UKRN, and so pleased to have today here Ben Marwick, Richard Ball, Adira from Fort, Richard from Project TIA. Ben is our guest speaker today to talk through this webinar series, this symposium, the first of 4 of these talks. Feel free to put your cameras on if you want to be visible. This is recording, so if you don't want to be in the recording, by all means, leave your videos off, leave your microphones off, and you won't appear in the recordings at all. These recordings will end up being made available through YouTube so that people can access them to catch up in the conversation that happened. I'll give it another couple of moments for a few more people to join. So take a moment if you need to, grab a drink, settle in for the discussion. Anyone who didn't hear the initial blurb, my name is Will Gawned. I'm the community manager for UKRN. Also joined today by Richard Ball from Project TIA, Adira Daniel from Fort, and Ben Marwick, who is speaking today about how he uses Project TIA in his teaching. There was a video that was circulated. Deanne, could you add a link to that in the chat in case people want to have a link to it? But we did share that link earlier, so hopefully you have taken an opportunity to watch that video to know what we'll be talking about today. I'll give it one more minute before we make a start. But thank you very much for everyone who has joined us already. Feel free to put in the chat where you're joining us from as well. Or if you'd like to, you could edit your name to show where you are joining us from. You can do that by clicking on the participants tab, which hopefully you'll see down the bottom of the page, and then you can edit your own name so that you can show where you're joining us from, or just put it into the chat. Wonderful, thank you. People from all over the place, which is really great to see. So thank you so much for joining us. Rightio, I will make a start. It's got a really lovely to see such an international audience coming together. So as I've mentioned, but I'll say it again in case anyone missed it, my name is Will Gawned. I work for the UK Reproducibility Network. I'm a community manager, and I work on a project that works with our grassroots level researchers, our local network leads, who are one of the member groups of the UK Reproducibility Network. The important thing to know about UKRN, the UK Reproducibility Network, is that we're a peer-led consortium and relatively informal in our organization in terms of what we prioritize is bringing people together, bringing networks together, and creating opportunities for collaboration across different institutions and with the wider research sector. Our mission is to allow the UK research sector to be outstanding in its research, world-changing, to encourage that through rigor and transparency and reproducibility. In some research disciplines, reproducibility has a very specific terminology, a very specific technical meaning, but in our terms of reference, we define reproducibility as research that is sufficiently transparent so that someone with the relevant expertise can clearly follow how it was done, why it was done that way, the evidence that it established, the reasoning and judgments that were used, and how all of that justifiably leads to the research findings and conclusions. It is being as open as possible, closed as necessary, so that someone else approaching that research can build upon it, can understand what was done. We represent many different research disciplines at UKRN. It's not evenly distributed across research disciplines, and we're actively working to bring more people in from disciplines, especially outside of the biomedical sciences and psychology. We're very well represented within those disciplines. And so if you have any interest in what UKRN is doing, you can visit our website. I trust we can put that in the chat in a moment to see some of the information there about what is going on. If you're not based in the UK and you're interested in what is going on, you can check out the global page of our website. There are reproducibility networks in about 25 different countries and regions around the world. So if we're not the appropriate forum to connect with, there might be someone closer to home that you can connect with, and we do work together globally. I think that's a sufficient introduction to what UKRN is, what the purpose is. Thank you for listening to my little blurb on that. I'll pass across to Richard Ball, who is here from Project Here, one of the stakeholder members of UKRN, who we're really grateful has organized this with you today. Richard, I'll pass to you.
Thank you very much, Will. So the concept of reproducibility that Will outlined is exactly the way Project Here thinks about it, making your work transparent and transparent enough that someone could reproduce everything that you did as a foundation for building future research that has a cumulative effect. So that's the broad conception of reproducibility. The particular focus of Project Here has been on teaching and education. And our goal is to help instructors find ways to teach quantitative methods to their students in ways that they're able to make sure that their work is transparent and reproducible to others, and to try to infuse that in the curriculum from the very beginning, from the first simple computer exercises they do in an introductory class, all the way through writing a doctoral dissertation and putting together complete reproduction documentation, such as many journals today are requiring. So we really are, ultimately, what we're trying to do is move the needle on how students are educated. So in some sense, students are the ultimate target audience, but approximately we work with instructors mostly, and work with instructors about what can they do to enhance their curriculum, to introduce reproducibility. So a moment ago, I put the Project Here website in the chat, and please feel free to have a look there, learn more about it, see some upcoming events. Now, this event is very much in the spirit of wanting to help instructors discover ways that work for them to teach reproducibility. And as in most things we do, we're taking a very down-to-earth, practical approach. Like, we want to give you realistic, concrete, meaningful things you can do in your classes, like starting next semester if you want, to enhance reproducibility. And so we're very fortunate to have 4 very accomplished, experienced educators and researchers to talk in some specificity about what they've done in their classes. And of course, different parts of different talks will resonate more for different people depending on their situations, but I think there should be general interest to a wide audience. And so we'll hope you'll take away something practical. And the last bit I would offer is that beyond the sessions of this symposium series, the broader idea is it's a mission of all of us. This is UKRN's mission, this is Fort's mission, and this is TIER's mission, is we don't want to just have a lot of one-off workshops and one-off symposia, but we would like to develop some sustained interaction, community, grassroots, and this is just this. So a secondary purpose of this series is just get people out, get people talking, and then we'll think about ways that we can build on this to continue have more interactions in the future. Maybe some of you in the audience today will invite you next spring to come present your work at the spring symposium, if that happens. Or maybe you'll have other ideas about ways we can collaborate. So that's the broader vision and invitation. Okay, with no further ado then, we're grateful to Fort for arranging the moderators for each of the sessions. And in particular, today, we're very fortunate to have Adira Daniel with us. And I will pass the baton to Adira and ask her to introduce herself. And then I think Will and I are going to fade into the background, and Adira and Ben will take on the rest of the webinar. So thanks for coming. We have great turnout, great diversity. It's wonderful. So, Adira.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome to our first session. This is so exciting. As Richard and Will have already mentioned, the goal for this symposium series is to share concrete strategies for bringing transparency and reproducibility into all types of research training. So in all 4 sessions, we'll hear from faculty who are leading such innovative approaches in their fields. Just a little bit about me. My name is Adira. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a PhD candidate in social psychology in the University of Western Ontario, which is in Canada. I'll be your moderator today. It's 9 a.m. for me, and I'm very delighted to be spending my morning in conversation with all of you. As the team mentioned, Dr. Ben Marwick's presentation, Teaching Reproducible Research Methods, Learning from Archaeology, is what we're going to be talking about today. The talk is present in the chat, and if you missed it, we'll copy the link and paste it again, just so in case you haven't been able to watch it through yet, you can take a look at it now. I am representing FORT, the framework of open and reproducible research training. If you'd like to hear a little bit more about what we're doing, we actually, such wonderful timing, have a session tomorrow at the same time, 9 a.m. CST to 8 to chat more about what FORT does and how you could be a part of it. I will paste the link for that in the chat as well. So with all of that information and a million links to you, we'll get started on our discussion today. Our speaker today is Dr. Marwick. He is a professor of archaeology at the University of Washington in America. His research spans Southeast Asia and Australia with a focus on stone artifact technology, geoarchaeology, and the transitions from foraging to farming. Beyond these contributions to archaeology, Dr. Marwick has become a leader in open science, integrating reproducible methods and replication assignments into his teaching. Today, Dr. Marwick will offer a brief recap of the talk that we've linked in the chat, after which I'll pose a few follow-up questions to get our discussion started, and then we'll open the floor for your questions. However, I'm sure if you've already come prepared with some questions, feel free to add those in the chat. Myself and a few of our team members will be looking and making sure that we try to address as many of the questions as possible during the chat, our discussion today. So hopefully there'll be a lot of overlap, so we'll have some good deep conversations. And if you'd like, after I open the discussion to all of you, you're welcome to unmute yourselves and turn on your camera and ask a question if you'd prefer. Just a reminder again that this talk is being recorded, so if you'd prefer to leave your camera off and just send messages in the chat, that is also totally acceptable. And that works well as well. So with all of that in mind, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ben Marwick to give a brief recap of his talk.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'm so pleased to be here. I'm particularly happy to be involved in this seminar series that's organized by 3 organizations that I really respect and admire and find like terrifically motivating, and the communities in each of those are just I find really supportive and a great source of inspiration. So I'm really happy to be a part of it myself. I just will share maybe the first 2 slides by way of kind of 1-minute recap. So let me just organize the screen a little bit. Okay, I think I just about got it. Here we go. All right, you can see the slide, hopefully. So from archaeology in particular, and I think, although perhaps none of you are archaeologists, there are not too many of us, I think the general approach is relevant, I think, to the social sciences and even other sciences like ecology and biology, which are also communities which I've been terrifically inspired by, and where a lot of this work is really pioneered, and I've just looked over and seen what they're doing. Particularly ecologists have a lot in common in terms of the way knowledge is generated, I think. So I hope this is sort of relevant to your field, even if you're not an archaeologist. So just to recap in a minute, I teach a pretty typical large public American university. Perhaps a detail worth recapping in particular is that my field of archaeology is a subdiscipline of a bigger field of anthropology. So we don't really have a strong undergraduate community. We sort of have students coming from different parts of anthropology with different expectations about what is archaeology. And as I mentioned in the talk, many of them, their expectation is like qualitative work. They're not going to be they don't expect to do a lot of things with numbers. So that's my kind of baseline student expectation that I'm working with. So that requires a very gentle introduction to this concept of reproducibility and assignments that value this. So I wanted to introduce this kind of concept. I call it a replication assignment. It's a bit of a terminologically maybe not imprecise, as we'll introduce the definition of reproducibility. Maybe that's the proper word here, but I did want to kind of honor this tradition in economics, which is the literature that I was really inspired by, when they tend to call it replication assignment. So I stuck with that term, which I slightly regret now, but never mind, it's working. That's the main thing. I wanted to get this assignment in my teaching the way I'd read in the economics literature, particularly Richard and other colleagues in Project T really led the way, and I just sort of followed what they did. But I ran into some friction points, and some things are unsatisfying, particularly students not being well prepared, as prepared as I would like them to be, and it requiring a lot of input from me and my teaching assistant. I wanted to, sort of try to reduce that and make it students have a bit more satisfaction about accomplishing this with a bit more independence. So part of improving the student experience, I think sort of 2 things I go into detail in the talk, and I can show some of the sort of raw materials of the classwork, the instructions that students see today. Firstly, it's kind of really scaffolding the experience. So rather than just giving them an assignment saying, here you go, here's the assignment, it's spread out over 4 or 5 separate smaller assignments. So there's lots of points for feedback and clarification by students. And then another point of improvement is introducing an entirely new class, a lower level class that is a much more gentle introduction to sort of data science in archaeology, and just getting students familiar with using R in the R programming language in particular. And then gradually refining that over the last couple of years of doing these 2 sort of innovations. So that's the kind of recap there. I'll stop sharing now, but I do have, I would like to show when as appropriate, some of the teaching materials in more detail, in case you're curious about like the nuts and bolts of what a student see in each of these steps. But I'll just stop talking and let you guys ask any questions that are on your mind right away.
Thanks so much, Ben. As we mentioned earlier, you're welcome to add questions in the chat. And please, if you'd like to ask questions using by unmuting, please use the raise hand function. That should be part of in the, I believe it's in the React section that you can just click raise your hand and we'll call on you very classroom style. But to start us off, I have a couple of questions that we can open with. Ben, as you mentioned, that a lot of students come in with more of an expectation for a qualitative basis of what they'd be doing in your classes. What do you think has been, or in your experience, what has been the hardest part about introducing reproducibility and coding into classes?
Yes, definitely. There's sort of several challenges, but I think the cultivating in students the sense that it's a normal part of the discipline and a valuable part, rather than just a very technical, esoteric, marginal kind of concern, to sort of let them know or help them to understand that, no, in fact, this is a big part of what we do. And just working quantitatively in the first place, and then secondly, that it's worth to be concerned about how this work is, the reproducibility of that work, and that is challenging to communicate as anything other than a very obscure, fussy sort of concern, particularly because a lot of, in some fields, there have been some really shocking things that when people have studied the reproducibility of the work, it's been revealed, and there's been this astonishing reveal that it's fraudulent or mistaken or something's wrong. But in archaeology, we haven't really had any striking moments like that. So it's a little harder to say like, oh, look at this example, we wouldn't know about this problematic work unless someone had studied the reproducibility of it. Because often, in our case, the problematic work is evident from qualitative analysis. We can just look at the photo of an archaeological site and say, oh, well, that's not right. The interpretation is not right. So instead, I try to motivate it, as rather than like research fraud or malpractice, I try to motivate along the lines of like, look, if we do work like this, we don't have to, the next person doesn't have to reinvent the wheel to do the same thing, and we can work a lot more efficiently. And if you are a student who wants to use some method that someone else has developed and they have shared the code, you can save so much time by taking their code and applying your stuff. And if you develop an amazing method, it is much more likely to be used by other people, and your influence on the discipline may be kind of multiplied if you can make it really accessible for people to use your stuff if you write it in, say, R or Python, and then share that in a nice way. And so that's the kind of key buttons I try to press. I try to give it a really positive framing. Like, we can make the discipline better for other people and for people that follow us if we work this way. And I feel that tends to touch people. There's a meaningful kind of motivation, but it's definitely a challenge. I have my sort of little sequence of classes, but this is not really like part of our departmental culture. It's sort of me and you guys and a sort of geographically scattered community of people working this way. So it's definitely it's something I look forward to in the future, is a more sort of coherent kind of curriculum where there maybe is one other class that sort of has a similar sort of assignment or value set. So that's a challenge. I sort of dream of this perfect university where everyone is teaching these kind of assignments. Perhaps that doesn't exist.
I mean, I think we all fantasize about that perfect university,
right,
for sure, of just like the old school, or what I think Aristotle likes to talk about, of like, we're just all hanging out and chatting about stuff and learning. And I think it's definitely a passion of mine as well. So in psychology, we definitely had that like mind blown grenade launch of like lots of things are not really as great as they could be when it comes to research. So definitely it's been really cool to see personally from like the big norm shift of a whole I guess, research culture itself of like there is this external pressure, or maybe not even pressure, but an external desire to be more transparent, to be able to have that ethical research practice. But as you mentioned earlier in archaeology, and maybe if I'm extrapolating, maybe anthropology is not always or hasn't had that big grenade launch of just like, oh shoot, like how are we making sure that this is going to be um, relevant long term as well? Is could you speak a little bit more about why that may be, or if there is just like lots of backlash, maybe not be the right word, but a lot of friction that you may be reaching when there hasn't been that big societal shift, so to speak?
Yes. I've been was interviewed by a journalist for Science magazine recently, and he kind of posed the same question. It's like, so
Yeah.
what's has there been a moment, and why not? And he even found some papers, recent high-profile papers about archaeology that had turned, that have been challenged and that have been
Yeah.
accused of being incorrect. And so there's 4 or 5 papers that he sort of suggested to me and said, look, is reproducibility the answer to tackling these papers that have turned out to be incorrect or contested by the community? And I looked, and only really one of them was that this is called the Moralizing Gods paper. All of these are very high profile sort of science nature papers. And in that case, it was, they had coded zeros as NAs in their tables of data. So this is very
Wow.
particular, very, very deep in the analysis. And someone would only have seen that had they attempted to do the sort of reproducible, replication effort. And so in that case, yes, that would be a moment where we see like, okay, this is something we can only discover where reproducibility is a thing that we value and do. But there are others that are perhaps more, I don't know, better known. These are ones about comets hitting an ancient city and destroying the city, and whether or not that is the true cause of the end of occupation of this ancient city. And these authors say, yes, it's the case, and the other archaeologists say, no, the evidence is not strong. But in most of those debates are not really about like the coding of the data or certain choices in the analytical workflow, but really about the interpretation of the imagery of the site, like photographs of the excavation and the layers of the sediment. And so that this is what I mean about the sort of qualitative, the crux of the debate is on a qualitative analysis where we don't really need to look at R or any of the tables of data. We're just sort of arguing about, is this layer really a different color from the other layer, or have this certain qualitative attribute? And so because so much of the essential debates in archaeology are at this qualitative level, I think that's why the sort of quantitative computation reproducibility hasn't yet had a moment where it's been decisive in sort of accepting or rejecting like major ideas about ancient people in the past. But I think it's changing, but just at a sort of generational, the old saying like one funeral at a time. As these kind of things become more normal and undergraduates normally learning R or Python, and then they go and do a PhD, and then a small number of them will become instructors, and they'll
Right.
also teach their class. That's the kind of pace that seem to be happening with. And at first I was very disappointed by that, like, oh, it's too slow, like we need this kind of earth-shattering like transformation. But now I feel like, okay, maybe that is the sustainable way, and I should just be more patient.
It definitely feels like it's the weirdly tortoise and the hare of who's gonna get to that like so to speak, more collaborative, reproducible science at the end of it. Sorry.
I just wanted to add, so teaching is obviously a critical part of the mission, but in having a class like this, it becomes kind of a touchstone for other points of action. So, for example, when we write a job advertisement to hire a new professor, once every 10 years or whatever, we don't do this very often. But then I can say, like, this is important. We need someone who's going to be able to teach students about working in a sort of open science way. Let's put a line in the job ad that says we'll prioritize applicants that have a track record of teaching open science. And I feel that's a huge win. And then we get a whole bunch of applicants that maybe wouldn't have otherwise applied, or they will highlight things in their application that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And my colleagues will see like, oh, people really are doing this, not just our very eccentric colleague doing this kind of stuff. And then they come and then they teach a class like this, and in this very slow way, these kind of reproducibility becomes part of a core value of the discipline. So, I would like to be able to point to like a transformative, shocking event, but I think the reality is it's this very gradual shift in values. Anyway, back to you.
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really fascinating. I think kind of going back a little bit to what you mentioned earlier, that shift in undergraduates, then becoming PhD students, then becoming professors. Do you have any different strategies that you use when teaching undergraduate students about reproducibility and transparency in research versus graduate students?
Yeah, good question. So in the classroom, not really, because many of them are kind of equivalent in this respect. Like the graduate students that come into so there's these upper division classes are a mix of graduate students and undergrads, and many of them are effectively the same in terms of their preparation and background and readiness and interest and this kind of thing. So I treat them basically the same, but undergraduate students that I advise directly, who may also be students in the class, the TA, I have quite different expectations of those, partly because I know I can support them in a different way. So for example, in an undergraduate class, I would never use Git or GitHub, for version control, which is very common in the world of, reproducible research. But for classroom, I just feel it's too much. It's not really critical to the mission.
Right.
There's a lot of potential complexity around doing that. But with a graduate student that I advise directly, that's a necessary part of their training, and I will very closely mentor them and how to do it. And I will usually have one of their first activities with me will be to co-author a paper of some kind, and we will write the paper in Quarto or Markdown in the past, and we will track we'll do the collaboration through Git and GitHub. So I have quite different expectations for those students I work with directly. And I know I'm going to be spending a lot more one-on-one time with. But in the class, no. In the classroom setting, I tend to treat them pretty much the same as the undergrads, because I know that that's the sort of similar background, and likely they will do the thing for my class, and then they will return to working in the habits of their advisor who's not doing anything like this. So I don't want to sort of have an unrealistic expectation, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that. You've already alluded to that a little bit with that comment of how hands-on or off you are with some students. And in your talk, you mentioned that students often feel that they couldn't have done the replication projects without your help. What kind of strategies have you found to be the most effective for building their independence while also kind of blowing their mind with learning a whole new process of doing science?
Yeah, let me share some of the details of the assignment that I think kind of reveal some of those strategies. So hopefully I will try to highlight the particular things and I think tackle that independence question. Here we go. So you can see this is our Canvas, the learning management system. And this project down here is how I've split up this replication assignment in one of the most recent kind of versions of it. So 4 steps, so there's maybe a 5th step of this collaboration report. And you can see the dating. This is from earlier this year. So January, February, later in February and March. So really spread out over the entire quarter. And then let's have a quick look. So part of that is spreading it out. So there's so many opportunities for the student to kind of to check in and us to discuss and so on. So let's have a quick look at,
check in. Your university has a 3 semesters or 4 quarters?
Yeah, we have 3 teaching quarters, 3 academic quarters in the academic year. We have a summer quarter, but most students are not taking classes there.
So it's about 3 months per course.
Yeah, 10 weeks, exactly. Yeah. So this is our winter quarter of this year. So this was January to March of this year. Just the previous academic year, but the current calendar year. So here's our first step. So they have to identify the paper, and then I provide this pretty short list of papers here where the analysis is relatively simple, and the key objective is one I'm pretty confident they can achieve. And also papers, of course, that are relevant to the class, and this is a major help, I think, because in an early iteration of the class, I just said, here's a very long list, and people chose papers that turned out to be really complicated, and I sort of took on the burden. I'm like, okay, you guys do this much, and I'll go from here to the rest of it. And then I'm like, that's not really a good way to do it. They don't feel very independent. So by giving them as much as possible the option to complete it with these fairly simple papers, that's one way to kind of give them that sense of independence. they have to track down a couple of scholarly publications to give them a bit of context to the paper. And then this kind of group contract. So I'm trying to be very deliberate about working together so that one student doesn't take on the entire project because they're like, oh, I know R, I will do everything. And the others are sort of helpless. So that's another way I try to tackle that sense of self-efficacy is like, okay, I'm going to be very deliberate about distributing the tasks, and everyone has to have their hands in on the code kind of thing. So because I was seeing this in some of the early versions, like just one person taking on, I'm like, no, that's not the experience I want everyone to have. So this happens quite early on. They've got to choose a paper, read it, get some context, and kind of organize themselves and make it clear that everyone's got to have a go. And then we've got this method sketch, and this kind of forces them to not just read the paper, but like find the materials that they need to succeed with the assignment, find the data files, they're usually just a CSV file. But sometimes this can be a bit complicated. Sometimes they're a supplementary file for the paper. Sometimes they're in a GitHub repository or on an open science framework, or they're all over the place. So it's not a one size fits all kind of task there. They've got to get them, and then they've got to give them back to me to prove that they found them. Because I was finding that students would get to the due date right at the end of the quarter, and they'd be like, "Oh, I can't find the files," and I thought that's not okay. Like we need to get that sorted out in the term. So, and then I also want them to be looking at the R codes that the other authors, so the original authors, have written for their paper, and identify like what are the tests they need to do, what kind of visualization, what are the names of things, start using the nomenclature, and what are the packages they're going to need to install, because we provide a cloud instance of RStudio for the students to use. And I have most of the pack, it's already supplied with most of the packages they need. But sometimes some of these papers use weird packages, very obscure ones, and I need to install it for them. Basically, I don't have the students install packages. Generally, that's the thing I keep away from them, because sometimes it can introduce unnecessary complications I don't want them to experience. I want every student to have a pretty similar experience to other students. I don't want some students having to go really deep in rabbit holes that others don't have to. I feel that's just unfair for everyone. So that's why I get them to name some of the packages, and then I check like, okay, is this one they already have, and so on. And then I want them to sort of think about the key claims. This is a sort of intellectual task relating to the subject matter of the course. So it's not all data science. There's a little bit of archaeology in there as well, and then submit that there. So this is a pretty critical step to kind of make sure they've got the basic things they need to succeed in the coming weeks of the class. And I can try to anticipate some of the challenges they might face. Most people have no problem finding this, but if they have a problem, we have plenty of time to kind of sort it out, because they're doing this pretty early on. So often that second step is where the main technical difficulties are. And for groups that need help, I will spend a lot of time like, okay, here's the data set, and this is the code that you want to look at, and here are the packages, and really guide them through that. And then the rest of it is often just sort of cruising to the end and filling in the gaps, writing the report. So this is a rough draft. And I just tell them to look at the grading rubric and kind of put together something that's 3/4 of the content, 3/4 of the rubric largely in place. And then it's another point for giving feedback. And often there's not much to say at this point. Everything is usually pretty good. It's large, it's often just a matter of getting them to give a bit more detail on the sort of substantive intellectual point that the paper is tackled. And these are the final instructions. So final submission. And so this is quite detailed, because I as I say, I want everyone to be doing a fairly similar level of work and have a similar challenge. So here's what we've got to submit: a Quarto document. And probably many of you already know Quarto is this. I can show an example of it a bit like this. It's a sort of text of paragraphs where the substantive like narrative text is written, and then you can have sort of chunks of R code in amongst that, and then you can render the entire document, and it just produces a beautiful Microsoft Word document or PDF, and with the output of the code in there. So they've got to produce submit their original source document, as well as the output document that has all the beautiful visualizations and text, and of course the raw data files. It's a full kind of replication package, a little simpler maybe than the project tier format, but definitely inspired by that concept. And then some more conventional guidelines of size, word count, and citations. And then I get very specific about the structure. You've got to have a title that does a certain thing, because often people just have untitled as their assignment thing, and I feel that's not It's a wasted opportunity for me as an instructor to guide students on how to communicate their work briefly, and then very fussy about certain sections of the document. This is such a short document, right? Barely 1,000 words, and yet I want them to have a very precise kind of way of organizing those. They do have to make a slight modification, so they should recreate the original author's analysis. Then they should change something, and often this is leaving out a sample of data or some new kind of visualization. A fairly straightforward modification. We have to talk about that and sort of discuss like how robust was the original work, once we try a few modifications of the analysis. And often most of the time is extremely robust and the results are the same. But I think it's useful for students to have that, to think about what's a meaningful thing to change. Let's make the change. Is it any different? Like to really interrogate the results that way, rather than just like, okay, the plot matches, we're done. And then results and conclusion and a few style suggestions. So these instructions have kind of accumulated over about 5 years, as I feel like, oh, that's a really annoying thing they're doing. I want to stop that. I'm going to write them some instructions to moderate. And then finally, there's this collaboration statement right at the end to try to reinforce this value I have of people trying to work together and bringing value to the whole thing. And it's quite basic. They just have to say, what did they bring to the assignment in the group, and what did other people kind of bring into it, just to encourage them to consider their work as kind of equal to others, and consider their contribution, make sure the contribution is relatively equal. So that this is kind of built up after hearing not many, but a few complaints from students like, oh, I had to do everything, or so and so did everything, and I didn't have a go, and I feel I missed out. So I'm like, oh, I don't want that to be a common thing. So that's kind of the real nuts and bolts, and these are the ones I have shared in the talk and in this repository here are quite similar, but a little more basic, because things have kind of evolved over time. Of course, I'm happy to share these more detailed ones with anyone who'd like to see those.
Thank you so much for showing us the actual like student focus or student side of things, because I definitely can see a lot of the universal design of learning practices involved and intertwined in some of the ways that you've set up these sections of assignments, and it's really, really cool to see. So thank you for that again. We have one question from the chat that's going quite on the other end of the spectrum. So we've talked a lot about with the student side and how you engage with the students. And our question now is about your interactions with your collaborators, your department, your faculty. Do you tend to have a lot of conversations with other qualitative archaeology researchers about whether they incorporate open research practices, to what extent they feel it's necessary, and are there any formalized opportunities to have these types of conversations within your specific department as well, outside of just hiring?
Yeah, interesting question. So do you have conversation in qualitative archaeology researchers in open research practice in their research? Yes. Interesting. Let's see. Perhaps because perhaps the short answer is probably no. Like, because my work is quite quantitative. That's those are the communities I'm most active in, and so they're the ones I really am interested in, kind of influencing, I suppose, and changing their ways, and I feel likely to be most receptive. I have had a couple of conversations with more qualitative focused researchers, and they have issues that I'm not well equipped to tackle, I guess, like confidentiality and privacy of informants, for example, if they're doing sort of ethnographic type of work, they're concerned about the amount of work it would take to anonymize their field notes and transcripts and so on. And so I don't really have a lot of experience around that. I'm not sure if it would be like incredibly time consuming or onerous, or if it's very trivial. So I just acknowledge that's a meaningful concern, and sort of am open to seeing how other people tackle it. So that's something I've heard that I don't really have any good sort of examples to point to. I do generally say, like, if I see one of my colleagues have a paper that's sort of qualitative, I say, did you put the photos, for example, on the repository so other people can study the high resolution set? And many people do that, but I think their motivation is more like sort of archival, historical archive reasons, rather than that someone could check their claims. I think many people still feel this is very sensitive topic. I think among qualitative researchers, this, in my impression, in particular, perhaps in my department, is more like, just trust me. Trust me, everything is correct and everything is fine. Read the paper. You don't need to see my field notes or my photographs or any more detailed data. You should just trust me. It's okay. And I think, okay, well, we have a tradition in our discipline of doing that. So I sort of respect that. But then we also have an emerging sense that, sort of trust but verify kind of view. And, of course I trust you, but I'd also like to see maybe there's some future research potential that can be taken out of your work, or maybe there's method content that can be adapted from your notes and materials that other people can benefit from. And just in propagating these new different values that don't hinge entirely on trusting someone is challenging, because there's definitely a personal element. If I say like, have you thought about positing your stuff, it sort of implies that maybe I don't trust them, maybe other people don't trust them, and this is really shaking the foundation of some of the norms of the discipline. So it's quite a delicate issue in qualitative research. The anonymity and protecting informants, and then this sort of very traditional notion of like just trusting the researcher, which in other fields I think people have moved on from. They're like, we trust you, but we'd also like to see all these other things, the workflow and the data, and that's going to become a norm in other fields, and it's not really much of a norm yet. It's coming. And I am it's very much about the personality, I think, of the person. Like I know there are some researchers in who are like, I don't know, maybe not aggressive, but outspoken, let's say, and quite happy to directly challenge people and maybe be a little bit offensive and so on. And I admire them for that characteristic and find it exciting. And these guys have podcasts and so on. I think James, is it Heathers? Is that his name? Feathers? I can't remember. Anyway, in a sort of biomedical, but that's not really my personal style. Like I don't feel very comfortable to like really directly confront and challenge and so on. I'm much more like, let's do good things together and talk about the good things of our field and make it better. And that's my orientation. So perhaps take a more delicate approach. Conversations in the department. In our department, our conversations are mostly about like teaching scheduling and very practical things. Research isn't often a big part of the conversations that we have, but I do enjoy these conversations with kind of a more geographically dispersed network of people that kind of share these values or are sort of more open to reproducibility, and that's really satisfying.
Well, kind of going off of that, if we did have individuals that would be wanting to or willing to engage with you specifically about these kind of conversations, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Yes, email is probably best. I just have noticed a question pop up in the chat here from Abuka. Have you had a major archaeological research work reproduced in your department more recently? Yes. I mean, I think because I am probably the main person doing this work, I can speak from my own personal experience. And so nearly every paper I write is in this form, is a sort of Quarto document where the code and data are available. So if I just look for a paper, any sort of example paper, I guess would be a good thing to see here, of one that's published recently. Okay, this is a very meta kind of topic, because it's a paper about reproducibility that also is reproducible. So let me share that. Is it coming? This is the most recent example of this. So this is in one of our kind of premier international journals, Journal of Archaeological Science. This is also a journal where I'm on the editorial board, and I have this role as the reproducibility editor. And this was a special issue of like the 50th anniversary of the journal, something like that. An invited paper where I was invited to like reflect on this work as the reproducibility editor. So this is tackling a very fundamental question: is our discipline a science or a humanity or what? I thought I would take an approach to this that I thought would be interesting, as well as kind of reflect on the reproducibility reviews. So this is a bibliometric analysis, not really traditional archaeology analyzing artifacts and so on, but although I have examples of those, and a study of citations and the qualities, quantitative attributes of journal articles. So I looked at 10,000 articles and things, for example, like how many authors are in each article and what is the length of the title relative to the length of the paper. And this data, this entire analysis is documented in a Quarto document, of which there are code and the data are all there. And what I think is particular, so that's an example of a reproducible project, but here is something particularly fascinating. It may take me a moment to find it, but perhaps I'll just tell you directly. This paper generated some interest. I think this question is exciting to people who don't care about reproducibility so much, but just who are in the discipline and want to know. But there was a colleague who is quite close to me. He's in France, but he's also very interested in reproducibility and archaeological science. He actually acquired a separate data set to the one I had and reran my code on this different data set of citations and a more open, it's called Open Alex. And I used Clarivate, like a closed source data set. He used an open source one. And was able to reproduce the entire analysis with some interesting subtle variations. Yeah, it was really very satisfying. That's very rare, by the way, that we publish a paper with code and data and someone actually goes to the trouble to fully reproduce everything, because it's quite time consuming for that other person. But in this case, very, very nice example of this scholar doing that. And it was done, often this kind of work can be done in a very combative way. Like, I am your rival and I'm going to do this to prove you wrong or weaken your findings. But this guy did it in a really kind of supportive way, and he was kind enough to let me know before he sort of shared the details widely, so I could at least be sort of mentally prepared for what he found. So that's a really nice example of major archaeological research. This paper that was reproduced independently by somebody else. So that's the case there. I can share the direct link to the PDF of this one in the chat here. And
yeah, that sounds awesome.
They're just there, yeah. So that's an example, and then I have more sort of conventional archaeological science papers, and that most of them are done in the same way, or in cases where I'm not the lead author, my part of the paper is done like that, and the rest of the paper is done with whatever the rest of the authors do, and that's more complicated. Slightly less satisfying, maybe. It'd be nice if we just had one giant Quarto document, but with 20 authors, and if I'm just the middle author, doing my sort of specialist contribution. I feel that's the best I can do. I'll just do my bit as well as I can and encourage the others to do the same. But many of them don't come to the paper with that background. It's not practical for them to, or at least they feel it's not practical to learn R and Quarto just for this paper when they've been doing this thing for a long time. So that's a sort of compromise that I deal with. But I feel, that's the nature of the game kind of thing. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and we really appreciate your time and efforts in creating the talk for us, and also to engage with such a enjoyable, reflective conversation after hearing your experiences as well. With the last few minutes left in our chat, I'd like to remind everyone that this is just the first of our symposiums. Our next symposium will be on October 2nd, starting at the same time. We'll be sending, it's already in there in the chat, information about the other events in the series and how to sign up. Our next session on October 2nd at the same time, 14 BST, is going to be Nicholas Huntington Klein, an associate professor of economics at Seattle University, and their talk is titled "Turning Vague Student Curiosity into Well-Defined Research Questions." So if you're curious about how to take those, just like, that seems interesting, and trying to make it articulate and head into a more practical research question, would highly recommend registering for that event and watching the videos before you head in. As a grad student, I'm definitely going to be watching that video just to kind of get a reminder of like, all right, that's how you figure that out. So I would really recommend for you to also share that video with your colleagues and encourage them to sign up for this discussion as well. This is a great opportunity to get that one-on-one time with these wonderful scholars and open science researchers that we don't always get to connect with. We have 5 more minutes for Ben to share some summary and concluding statements. And other than that, we will see y'all in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much again for coming.
All right, thanks. I'll go ahead and share some concluding thoughts. So I did, while you were speaking, Adira, I did just find the replication report by this independent scholar. So I just shared that in the chat. And I would say, just to conclude, like, I recommend to give it a go if you have the freedom. And I recognize not everyone has the freedom to like modify the structure of a class. In my program, I'm very lucky. I can teach pretty much whatever I want and whatever way I want. And if you're in a similar situation, I would say go for it. But keep your expectations kind of modest initially, and imagine it as a long-term project that might span several iterations and several years of teaching the class. If you're have the luxury of that opportunity where you can imagine a long-term plan, I think it's extremely satisfying professionally. And this has become quite a productive kind of branch of my professional profile. I'm probably better known as someone who's quite interested in reproducible research than as an archaeologist in of East and Southeast Asia. Although that's been totally fine as well. But I think it's well worth it. And furthermore, I came to this after my PhD, so this was something I sort of took on after my professional training was sort of officially kind of done. So it's kind of a risky move, and yet I feel it paid off, and I would recommend it if you're sort of thinking like, well, I have so many things to do, and I really need to commit to like a sort of trajectory of professional activity. I think it's possible to take on something fairly challenging and novel like this, even late in the PhD or post-PhD, and have it succeed and have it become a really meaningful, profound part of your professional work in a way that's really satisfying and rewarding. And I think it's partly thanks to people like Richard and organizations like Fort and UKRN that allow us to sort of be recognized for this effort, because they normalize this as a sort of core value of our discipline. So thanks very much to you guys for providing the kind of foundation for individual instructors to take risks and do new things and have it be valued. You want to write about this into your tenure and promotion statements and say, look, I'm doing something really new, but it's something that people value. And maybe you don't, maybe your departmental colleagues don't, but people generally do, and that's a really useful thing to be able to draw on. So good luck if you're considering this. And of course, I'm really happy to give feedback and guidance. And if you want to have a closer look at the most recent versions of my instructions, I'm totally happy to share them. And if you just want to use them identical to how I've written them, that's also fine as well. All of this is kind of CCBY sort of style attribution. I don't feel very protective about that at all. And a lot of it has come from other instructors that I've just kind of copy and pasted into my assignments and adapted. So absolutely, you're all welcome to all those materials, and I'm happy to give feedback on stuff you're working on. If you have a longer or shorter classes and want to adapt it, I'm happy to give my thoughts on that. So thanks very much, and I'm really happy to be able to join this exciting seminar series. Good luck to you all.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'll pass it over to Will and Richard in case they have any concluding comments, and otherwise I think we're wrapping up.
I see hearts and clapping hands floating across the screen. I'm not really sure where they come from. That expresses my point of view. So thank you very much, everybody.
Also, thanks from me. It's been really enlightening and wonderful to hear. And it's really great to have such a diverse audience, such an international audience that is interested in this. Really, the strength of what we can do is through joining together, doing these things. It can be really isolating sometimes when you are in your own institution and no one seems to be worried about this sort of thing. But there are people out there, organizations like UKRN and the other reproducibility networks around the world are a great way to kind of get together and start to talk about these things. And research culture changes will be slow, as Ben mentioned, but it's really wonderful. If we get together, we can make these things happen, and they are making research better. So thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Right, yeah, we'll just close the meeting, stop the recording, and goodbye.